At 8:07 a.m., cold Zurich sunlight hit the Aurelia Group's headquarters. Victoria Hale, 34, the CEO, faced a brutal calendar and a crucial $300 million acquisition deadline. Her assistant quit under unbearable pressure. HR sent the last temp candidate. Victoria frowned when Ethan Cole, 39, a single dad in a simple shirt, walked in, feeling instantly judgmental. Her gaze was sharp, dismissive, and entirely focused on the bottom line. She spoke with ice. "This is temporary, just one day." Ethan simply nodded. "One day is enough to show who I am." Victoria had no idea that one day would completely change her life. Victoria Hale was a testament to cold, hard calculus. At 34, she was the youngest CEO in Aurelia Group history. She lived in a sprawling, minimalist penthouse, luxurious but utterly empty. Her philosophy was brutal. Emotion was a liability. She had just navigated a hostile acquisition that nearly derailed the company, and now her most crucial executive support had dissolved under the strain. She viewed the sudden departure as pathetic weakness. Her mind was a relentless, high-speed machine. Ethan Cole, at 39, was built from quieter, tougher material. His world was centered entirely on his 8-year-old son, Noah. 6 years ago, a sudden accident had stolen his wife and shattered his promising career as an operations manager. He had walked away from the corporate ladder without a second glance to focus solely on his child. Now he was applying for one-day temp work because Noah's old furnace had just died. The repair was expensive. He desperately needed the cash. Victoria's first hour was a test of fire. She handed Ethan a densely packed schedule, meetings deliberately double-booked, impossible administrative tasks, and 3 simultaneous requests for high-level data. She was consciously pushing his limits, daring him to break, to panic, to resign by lunchtime. This was how she vetted people. Ethan did not panic. He did not argue. He simply stood by the glass whiteboard, his movements quiet and deliberate. He began remapping the entire day. He color-coded the meetings by priority and cross-referenced their geographical location. He cut 45 minutes of unnecessary travel time. He suggested 3 simple shifts in the meeting order that smoothed the day's flow, transforming the impossible chaos into elegant logic. Victoria, watching from her desk, felt a faint, unfamiliar flicker of surprise. Everything was suddenly moving faster, smoother. She dismissed him sharply to fetch her coffee. "I need a triple shot Americano, black, no ice. And be quick about it." Ethan returned in precisely 6 minutes. He placed the heavy mug on a coaster. "Ms. Hale," he stated quietly, "I noticed you took your coffee black this morning, but your previous assistant logged it as having 2 sugars." Victoria paused mid-sentence on a text message. It was a minuscule detail. The previous assistant, who had worked for her for 18 months, had never remembered the change. Ethan, in less than 60 minutes, had logged, analyzed, and corrected the data point. "You saw me drink it this morning?" she asked, genuinely curious. "No," Ethan replied, his expression neutral. "I saw the slight wince when you tasted the sugar. I cross-referenced the sugar intake against your blood pressure report in the medical file that HR provided. You cut sugar 72 hours ago. The wince was discomfort, not dissatisfaction. Here is the new order." Victoria stared at the cup. This wasn't subservience. This was ruthless, efficient analysis. This was exactly how she thought. "Very well, Mr. Cole," she said, picking up the Americano. "Let's see if you can keep up." She knew in that moment that this day would be different. The tempo increased immediately. Victoria pulled Ethan into the highest level meetings. The conference room was dominated by the board of directors, men and women who had watched Victoria ascend with grudging respect and constant skepticism. They immediately dismissed Ethan. "The temporary help," one sneered under his breath. The current meeting ground to a halt. It concerned the failing integration of a subsidiary supply chain. The discussion was mired in complex financial modeling and theoretical frameworks. For 20 minutes, the directors tossed blame and jargon back and forth. No solution emerged. Ethan, sitting silently by the wall, finally leaned forward. "May I offer a different angle, Ms. Hale?" Victoria, momentarily stunned by his audacity in such a forum, waved a hand, granting permission. Ethan didn't talk about PE ratios. He talked about truck routing. The subsidiary's problem isn't capital. It's inventory placement, he explained, his voice calm and clear. They are sending 40-foot containers to service zones that only require 20-foot capacity. This creates unnecessary deadhead mileage and adds a redundant sorting step at the receiving dock. We need to restructure the internal delivery logic, not the external financing. Silence descended. The head of logistics, a man who had been with Aurelia for 30 years, slowly leaned back in his chair. He's right, the director admitted, a hint of awe in his voice. That's a ground-level fix. Brilliant. Victoria looked at Ethan. He wasn't a strategist. He was a problem solver. He was looking at the logistics of the problem, not the politics of the solution. It was the first time someone in her office had cut through the corporate noise with such simple, practical truth. As the day progressed, the director's initial disdain curdled into suspicion. Victoria noticed the sidelong glances. The whispering stopped abruptly whenever Ethan entered the room. They recognized the clarity he brought, and it threatened their established, comfortable inefficiency. Mr. Schneider, in particular, watched Ethan like a hawk, meticulously documenting every move. In the late morning, Ethan demonstrated another, more subtle layer of competence. Victoria gave him a chaotic travel schedule to fix. 3 continents in 4 days. While her former assistant used standard corporate software, Ethan pulled up a niche, independent logistics application, optimizing flight patterns based on real-time wind patterns and historical delay data. He found a 90-minute time savings on a crucial Shanghai connection. "How did you know to use this platform?" Victoria asked, genuinely impressed. "When I was VP of operations, I learned that the best solutions are rarely the ones the company pays millions for," Ethan answered. "They're the simplest ones that work." Lunchtime arrived. Victoria usually had a catered, isolated meal in her office, a necessary fuel stop. She ordered a lavish 3-course meal for herself and casually instructed Ethan to take his break. "I'll be in the break room, Ms. Hale," Ethan said, picking up his old satchel. "Don't you want to order something? We'll expense it." "Thank you," he replied, "but I promised my son I'd call him during his recess." Victoria, who had a $50 million view and an empty schedule, found herself sitting alone, listening. The walls of her office were soundproof, but she pressed the intercom button to connect all systems under the pretense of technical checks. She could faintly hear Ethan's voice through the speakers. "Okay, buddy, divide by 0 is undefined, remember? Like trying to split a cookie between 0 people. You can't." A gentle chuckle. "Yes, I'm wearing the warm shirt. Did you put on your fleece jacket? Good boy. Daddy loves you. See you soon." Victoria, who hadn't shared a meaningful conversation with anyone outside of corporate strategy in years, felt a profound, sudden chill. She hadn't been called, checked on, or reminded to put on a warm jacket since her mother passed away. She realized she was listening to a man who, despite his financial struggle, was anchored by genuine, reciprocal human connection. Her own lunchtime routine was mechanical. 30 minutes, no emotion, fuel for the machine. Listening to Ethan, she felt a sudden, sharp ache for the messiness of his life, a messiness that was filled with purpose and love. She spent her next 10 minutes staring at her own desk phone, realizing no one, absolutely no one, ever called her just to ask if she was wearing a warm coat. She was necessary, but utterly unessential to any single, living soul outside of the Aurelia ecosystem. A minor conflict arose in the afternoon. Mr. Schneider, the director of risk assessment, a man notoriously jealous of Victoria's swift rise, found Ethan alone by the printers. "So, the CEO is bringing a babysitter to meetings now?" Schneider sneered, attempting to rattle the temporary assistant. Ethan simply gathered his papers, his face impassive. "I am here to ensure Ms. Hale's efficiency, Mr. Schneider. If my presence bothers you, perhaps you should focus on your own." Schneider laughed cruelly. When he repeated the comment in a later meeting, Victoria's composure snapped. She stood up, her hands slamming onto the table. "Mr. Schneider, you will retract that immediately. Mr. Cole provided the ground-level fix that saved us a 4-month logistical bottleneck. Sit down and show respect, or you will be asked to leave. Schneider sat, shocked into submission. Victoria had defended him, not as a subordinate, but as a valued associate. The final act of the day came at 4:55 p.m., 5 minutes before closing time. A crucial merger contract with a U.S. firm was finalized. It was 300 pages of legal jargon. Victoria scanned the signature page, adrenaline wearing off. "Wait," Ethan said, his hand hovering over the document. He pulled out a red pen. Article 4.3, subsection B. The indemnity clause states a 6-year liability term, not the standard 4. This subtle change was not in the initial draft. It could bankrupt us in an audit. Victoria grabbed the document. Ethan was right. A single insidious error. If she had signed it, the repercussions would have been catastrophic. She looked up at him, her usual composure fractured. "You just saved us millions of dollars in a major legal disaster, Mr. Cole. In one day." Ethan only smiled, a genuine, tired, yet entirely self-assured smile. "That's what I do, Mrs. Hale. That's what I was hired for." The clock struck 5 p.m. The day was officially over, but the day's events had already sent ripples through the corporate structure. Whispers of the miracle temp who fixed the supply chain and spotted the indemnity trap reached the ears of the board. Victoria called an emergency review of Ethan's file. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was vastly overqualified. Twist 1. The hidden past. The review revealed the truth. Ethan Cole wasn't a humble administrative assistant. 6 years ago, he was Ethan Cole, VP of Strategic Operations for a major rival firm. A genius in logistics and contingency planning. He had been on the fast track to a CEO position himself. His departure was abrupt, categorized in the industry as a disappearance. The reason? Personal tragedy, his wife's sudden death. Victoria stood over the printout, her hands braced against her desk. He wasn't hired for his past, just for today. She felt a wave of crushing guilt. She had exploited this man, a former colleague, a true talent, treating him like cheap labor, pushing him to the edge because he needed money for a furnace. Her professional ruthlessness, she realized, had a deeply personal, human cost. The coldness she exuded was a defense. The strength Ethan projected was born from acceptance. She found him organizing his desk, ready to leave. "Why didn't you tell me, Ethan?" she asked, using his first name for the first time. He looked up, meeting her gaze calmly. "I wasn't hired for my past, Victoria. That person no longer exists. I was hired to do a job for one day. And I did it." A massive crisis erupted at 4:45 p.m. The news alert flashed across Victoria's terminal. The primary partner for their biggest upcoming venture had just pulled out. The reason, clearly stated in the memo from the partner's firm: concerns over the CEO's rumored instability and sudden, volatile staffing changes. They cited the recent high-level resignations and the hostile reaction in the board meetings, all leaked by internal sources, likely Schneider. The deal was off. Billions were lost. Victoria felt the floor drop out from under her. All the pressure she had held back for a decade, the relentless demands of her family, the skepticism of the board, the isolation of her position, coalesced into a suffocating, blinding weight. This wasn't just a loss. It was public humiliation, proving her critics right. Her breathing became ragged. Her perfect world was collapsing around her, not because of a technical failure, but because of a toxic culture of fear and internal sabotage she had allowed to fester. She couldn't move. The fear of being defeated, of being proven weak, was paralyzing. Her hand hovered over the emergency crisis button, but she couldn't press it. The machine had finally seized up. Ethan stepped past her, moving with the quiet efficiency of a first responder. He picked up the main line. "This is Ethan Cole, executive assistant to Ms. Hale. I need to speak to Mr. Alistair, the VP of Mergers, immediately. Tell him I have the corrected indemnity clause and the new logistical strategy." Ethan calmly took control, his voice a steady lifeline in the storm. He didn't beg. He presented facts. He highlighted the strength of Aurelia's new, efficient structure, the one he fixed. He guaranteed the long-term integrity of the partnership, turning the legal weakness into a point of aggressive strength. He even directly addressed the stability concern, stating that Ms. Hale was implementing fundamental, positive cultural shifts to ensure long-term, focused productivity. After 10 minutes, the call ended. "We're back on," he announced simply. Alistair respected the decisive action. "He's sending the revised intent letter now." Victoria didn't respond. She stumbled into her private washroom, the luxurious space suddenly feeling like a cage. She slid down the wall and, for the first time she could remember, she let go. The sobs were silent, wrenching, and completely uncontrolled. The facade she had built since she was a teenager cracked, then shattered. Twist 2. The shared vulnerability. Ethan followed her, not as a helper, but as a human. He found her crumpled on the floor. He didn't offer a corporate platitude or a cliché about stress. He simply stood there, waiting for the storm to pass. When the sobs subsided, Victoria looked up at him, her eyes red, her makeup smeared. She looked impossibly young and small. "I hate this," she whispered, her voice raw. "I hate carrying it all. My father always told me, success means never needing anyone." She confessed the impossible standard she had been raised under. A life of constant competition, where her academic achievements were immediately followed by the question, "What's next? Why aren't you better?" She had eliminated all friends, all hobbies, all potential partners, viewing them as bandwidth drain. The empire was her shield, and now that shield had failed. Ethan sat down beside her, leaning his back against the cool marble wall. He didn't touch her. He just shared his silence, his presence a solid weight. "You don't have to carry everything alone, Victoria. That's a terrible lie." He told her about the night his wife died. He confessed the terror of leaving the only world he knew to raise Noah alone. He spoke of the countless nights he had stayed up, rocking his sick son, praying he wouldn't fail him. The terror of simultaneously being a father and a mother, a doctor and a teacher, all while barely having enough for groceries. "Loss strips you bare," Ethan reflected, his voice distant. "It takes everything, the career, the ambition, the future you plan. But in the quiet after the storm, you realize what you truly need is simple: a warm heart and someone to share the watch with. You can't divide by one." He explained that for 6 years, his single greatest fear was the world ending when his back was turned, failing Noah because he was too busy chasing success. He saw that same crippling fear in Victoria's eyes, the terror of the perfect, manufactured world finally coming undone. Victoria realized what she was missing. It wasn't efficiency, it wasn't money. It was the simple, profound honesty of a partner who saw her worth beyond the balance sheet. She had hired a temporary assistant for one day, and instead she had found the co-pilot for her life. The next morning, Victoria did not let Ethan go. She asked him to stay for another week. "I need you, Ethan," she stated, her professional voice returning, but infused with a new sincerity. "You are the best operational mind I have ever encountered. We need to stabilize the company culture before the board uses this against us." Ethan hesitated, pulling his well-worn phone out. "I can't. Noah has afternoon tutoring 3 days a week, and he has a soccer practice that ends at 4:30 p.m. I need to be there for him. I won't sacrifice his stability for even the best salary." Victoria looked at the phone, then at her own corporate calendar, a monument to her self-imposed isolation. She realized the fundamental truth. He wouldn't compromise his family for her company, and that was exactly why she needed him. She didn't argue. She didn't offer more money. She called her chief of staff. "Effective immediately," Victoria announced, her tone non-negotiable. "All essential executive meetings are to be scheduled between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. All internal correspondence, unless categorized as a level 1 emergency, must wait until the following morning. I want a company-wide memo announcing the core hours policy by the end of the day. If the work can't be done in a focused 6-hour window, it's not efficient work." She was reorganizing a multi-billion-dollar global corporation to accommodate the school schedule of an 8-year-old boy. The policy was immediately dubbed the Coal Edict by the lower-level staff, who greeted it with silent, stunned relief and gratitude. For the first time, they felt seen. The board went ballistic. Their emails were scathing, their calls full of outrage. Emotional interference. Sacrificing billions for sentimentality. Victoria convened an emergency video conference. She sat alone in her office, composed and unyielding. Gentlemen, she began, her voice steady, you have criticized my emotional state, but I will not tolerate inefficiency. Mr. Cole, in a single 8-hour day, solved a supply chain issue that has cost us $14 million in overruns and averted a contractual crisis that would have led to a class action lawsuit. The efficiency of the past week, driven by his organizational genius, has increased our output by 18%. I am not hiring help. She leaned into the camera, her eyes cold and absolute. I am choosing a partner, a collaborator. You can oppose my emotional choices, but you cannot oppose my results. If any of you continue to sabotage my decisions by leaking false information to partners, I will see to it you are replaced before the fiscal quarter is over. The days of working until burnout are over. The board fell silent. They knew her threats were real. The new core hours policy was swiftly implemented. Ethan accepted the extension, but on one condition. He brought Noah in for a few hours that Saturday to see where Daddy works. Victoria, nervous about the domestic intrusion into her sanitized corporate space, found herself subtly rearranging the office to look less intimidating, moving a severe sculpture, adding a bowl of fruit. Noah, a bright-eyed, observant boy, walked into Victoria's silent, enormous office. He looked at the stark white walls, the glass tables, and the panoramic view of the city. He didn't look impressed. He looked concerned. Do you work too much? Noah asked Victoria directly, holding his father's hand. Victoria, caught completely off guard, paused. She looked at the boy, then at the man who had worked himself into the ground for her demands, and finally at the empty life reflected in the glass walls. I think so, Noah, she admitted, a genuine quiet smile finally reaching her eyes. They ended up having a simple, shared lunch in the conference room, takeout pizza and sodas. It was the most relaxed Victoria had been in years. The conversation was not about global finance, but about why dogs chase squirrels and how to make paper airplanes fly longer. Ethan watched her, noticing the softening around her eyes, the real laughter that replaced her practiced, corporate chuckle. You're happier when you're not talking about EBIT, Ethan observed later, as Noah was distracted by a digital globe. EBIT is all I've ever known how to talk about, Victoria admitted, suddenly vulnerable. It's my language. I'm fluent in metrics, but mute in emotion. Then it's time for a second language, Victoria, and the only way to learn is by immersion. As they prepared to leave, Noah busied himself with a corporate notepad and a handful of colored markers. He proudly presented the finished work. It was a crude, colorful drawing. 2 stick figures, a tall, serious one labeled Dad, and a severe-looking, crowned one labeled Victoria, were standing side by side, holding large, smiling tools. The caption was scrawled at the bottom, Dad and Victoria fixing things together. Victoria took the drawing, her hand trembling slightly. It wasn't a memo. It wasn't a contract. It was a witness statement of collaboration, of shared effort, drawn by a child who saw them, not as CEO and assistant, but as 2 people working together. 2 months later, in a pivotal address to the company, Victoria announced the restructuring of her executive team. I learned a crucial lesson this year, she began, standing next to a surprisingly calm Ethan. I believed leadership meant isolation. I believed strength meant carrying the entire load alone. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping the room. That belief nearly destroyed this company and nearly destroyed me. We are strongest when we are whole, and we are whole only when we prioritize our humanity alongside our goals. She turned to Ethan, her professional armor completely gone, replaced by genuine, focused respect. I hired Ethan Cole for one day, purely out of necessity. Today, I am proud to announce that he is my new partner, operations and strategy. He is not my subordinate. He is my equal, and he is the strength this company has been missing. The room erupted. The staff, beneficiaries of the Cole Edict, cheered wildly. Ethan, now dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, accepted the cheers with a simple, grounded dignity. When the dust settled, Ethan pulled Victoria aside. I accept, Victoria, he said, his smile genuine. but only on the condition that my son always comes first. That means if he needs me, the multi-billion-dollar deal can wait 5 minutes. Victoria didn't hesitate. She didn't need to. That, Ethan, is why I need you. That is the rule. You are teaching me what balance looks like. The final, essential step was personal. That evening, Victoria drove to Ethan's modest apartment. She brought nothing corporate, just a bottle of wine and a deep, unfamiliar sense of anticipation. They ate dinner at the small, slightly rickety kitchen table. The food was simple, pasta and a salad. Victoria felt more nourished than she had in years. Noah, completely at ease, studied Victoria with the innocent curiosity of a child. "Are you lonely?" Noah asked, completely earnest, while chewing on a piece of chicken. Victoria froze. The question, asked without malice or professional filtering, struck her like a physical blow. She realized the truth, spoken aloud for the first time in years. "I was," she whispered, her voice catching. "Very lonely, Noah. But less now." She went on to explain carefully to the boy how she had built a huge glass castle, but forgotten to put any people inside it. Noah listened, nodding sagely. Ethan reached out across the table, his hand resting on her arm, a steady anchor. "You don't have to be anymore, Victoria," he said softly. "Welcome to the mess." The scene that followed was utterly foreign to Victoria's world. She was not signing documents or making demands. She was learning to do the dishes, awkwardly wiping down the counter, laughing as Noah insisted she try his simple, slightly burnt cookies. It was messy, it was real, it was home. Later, sitting on the worn sofa, Victoria found herself watching the news. A reporter was analyzing the new radical core hours policy at Aurelia. The analyst called it a daring move towards human-centric efficiency. Victoria simply shook her head and smiled. She looked at Ethan, who was patiently reading Noah a story. She reflected on her old penthouse routine, staring at stock tickers, listening to the city silence. Now she was surrounded by the scent of warm laundry, the clatter of a misplaced toy, and the low, comforting voice of a man reading a story about a brave knight. This noise, she realized, was music. She had hired him for one day, seeking a temporary fix for a logistical problem. She received instead a permanent co-pilot, not for her company, but for her life. She found the honesty, the collaboration, and the quiet human connection that had been missing from the empty height of her luxurious peak. The temporary hire had become her life's permanent necessity. The final frame. Victoria stood between Ethan and Noah, her hand resting naturally on Noah's shoulder. They were cleaning up the kitchen, the air filled with the quiet, comfortable sounds of a family. Victoria was wearing a soft, borrowed apron, far more comfortable than the corporate armor she had worn for years. The CEO, once defined by her isolation, was finally part of something larger, something messy, something real. She hired him for one day, expecting a subordinate. She found the partner she'd been missing her entire life. If this story of partnership and healing touched your heart, subscribe to NL Touching Stories for more emotional journeys.